So the fact is, we're all going to leave our business someday, including me. Whether you're thinking about selling now or one day in the future, today I'm going to talk about some of the things I've done building, growing, and selling my own businesses, and hopefully there's some things you can take away and apply to your own company. So I'd like to talk about a few things today that I've learned over the years, and they're all things that you can go away and apply, and hopefully, regardless of the stage you are in the business, you can apply those things and help grow your company to a position where it can eventually be sellable for the highest valuation you could possibly achieve. Firstly, thanks very much to Benedict and Christoph for organising the event. And I'm going to talk about 4 main strategies I've applied time and time again to successfully build and sell businesses. And then hopefully those are things you can all apply to your own company. So firstly, a little bit about me. I'm Thomas Smale. I founded FE International in 2010. I started out at college buying and selling like very small websites for myself just to try and make a little bit of extra money while I was at university. Never really had any idea of like what I was actually going to do with it. So back in 2010, I decided to write a book about buying and selling websites. I think it's like a really easy way to get into like making some money online. The book did quite well, got really popular. A bunch of people were buying it. A lot of good feedback from that. And then off the back of the course, like I've seen many times before, people came to me and said, "Hey Thomas, I've read your book about selling websites. Have you ever thought about offering a service where you help people do it?" So that's how FE International, as it is today, was born. We started selling like very small websites for people at the time. And then over the years, we've consistently focused on that and continuing like grown through a lot of word of mouth and various other channels. But consistently throughout the years, we've continued to buy and sell businesses for ourselves. And I've always found that applying my own experiences to the work we do with clients is like a real big value add. Like no one really wants to hear from someone who talks about what they've seen elsewhere, but they've never actually done it themselves. So FE International as a company, like when I first started out, it was literally just me in my like room at college. Like wasn't really a business, didn't really know what I was doing. I was just a kid back then. Over the years, we've grown quite significantly. We now have offices in London, Saigon, and Boston, where our head office is now. We have a team of 23 people, and we also have a couple of other businesses we run. So we have a 7-figure SaaS company and a small marketing agency as well. In the last year, we did about 100 different deals, and we've done 450 deals in total. And we've also sold a number of businesses for ourselves over the last 6 years. So one of the main things I want to talk about today are strategies that all of you can apply to your business, regardless of the type of business you have, how big it is. It might just be you. You might have a team of 50 people already. But these are all things you can apply in one way or another, and things that I've consistently done and seen other people do. So one of the things that sets us apart as a company from a lot of others is our success rate. So businesses we take on have a 95% chance of selling with us. And the reason for that is we're very specific with the kind of businesses we know that will sell, and we make sure we work with people who have done things well and followed these 4 like very core principles I'm going to talk about today. So before I go into the things we've done, it's important to understand what buyers are looking for. Even if you're not thinking about selling at all, that day is going to come one day. So it's important to think about what they're looking for and position yourself correctly. So if for whatever reason you have to sell sooner than you thought about, you're in a good position to do so. So I'm going to specifically talk about SaaS businesses, but a lot of these things can be applied to all sorts of different other business models. So in SaaS, we track a lot of data on what buyers are looking for. what I look for as a buyer. And these are probably like the 6 main ones that come up over and over again. So firstly, low churn. Churn is generally a sign that a product is good and the customer service is good, and it's the kind of product people want to continue using. One thing I've noticed over the years is that a lot of small businesses and small SaaS products tend to have a much higher churn rate than like their enterprise counterparts that might have venture capital funding. But in my experience running SaaS companies that I've acquired, there are lots of things you can do to reduce that churn rate and be in line with some of the larger companies out there. But I'll go into those a little bit later. Another thing that comes up all the time, people want a business that's growing, whether that's your MRR, your ARR, or your overall revenue. Buyers are always looking for something that's going in the right direction. When it comes to SaaS specifically, buyers prefer monthly recurring revenue over annual recurring revenue. This is one that comes up a lot. The SaaS business we run now, when we acquired the business, the code was not documented at all. We spent tens of thousands of dollars going through that documentation process. If that had been done up front, then that business would have been a lot easier to take over, and the seller would have, I guess, made more at the time. So even if it's just you working by yourself and you think, well, it's completely pointless to document it because it's just for me, start doing it, because you never know when the day might come where either your sales start growing significantly and you need to hire people, or where you might have to step away from the business. You have a new project. A business that's evergreen is really important. A lot of people I see build businesses around like really specific trends, and they'll see something that's really popular at the time. But you really need to ask yourself, is that something that's still going to be around in 10 years' time? And if you're not sure, focus on something that you know is evergreen. It might seem a little bit more boring, and I think a lot of people kind of make the mistake that a really exciting, interesting thing that everyone's talking about is the way you should build a business. But in my experience, the companies that do really well and are sellable, and the ones I focus on acquiring, selling myself, are evergreen. And that usually means they're quite boring and not necessarily trends that other people are like thinking about. Another one, particularly if you are thinking about selling at some stage, buyers always want to acquire a business that has growth opportunities still. So don't literally max out the business and do everything you possibly can do. Make sure there are things that a buyer can still bring to the table and do themselves. A lot of the time, particularly with the businesses I've acquired, I've seen that the growth opportunities that a current owner might have are not necessarily things that a buyer can do. They might have a specialized skill set. Or the other way around, as a buyer, you might have specific resources that a owner doesn't have, and you can go ahead and apply those. That might be like more cash, more resource, better contacts, and those can all be applied. So, of the 4 steps, step 1 is get your ducks in a row. So, in practical terms, like what does that mean? It's all very well saying get your ducks in a row. It's quite like a common phrase. But here are some like 3 really practical things I've done with companies I've taken over, and I see time and time again work really well. So the first is establish really clear protocols. When you're starting out, if you just have a small business, chances are you're still trying to figure out what works, how to do things. But as you start to master certain things and things start to work well, then start to write down what you've done, document it, and make sure you do that same thing time and time again, and keep it like super consistent. The thing to keep in the back of your head is creating a business or like a business model that can operate in your absence. Even if it's just you working by yourself or with a partner, you want to build a business and like have processes in place. That means if you have to step away, whether that's for hiring someone to come into the company, whether you're selling and a buyer's coming in and taking over, that they can come in and do that. So in practical terms for the businesses we've done, we use Atlassian and their product Confluence. Everything we do gets written out in Confluence. We have pages and pages of documentation for people to follow. And we encourage everybody in the company to contribute to that. It's not, processes aren't dictated by me. They're people in the team who are doing the day-to-day work. And I've also found it's really important to continuously improve what you're doing. You may well find that something you're doing today in 12 months' time might not work that well. So if things start to change, keep that documentation up to date and encourage your team or your partner or whoever that might be to keep things progressing as well. And the key there is really just something that can run without you. That doesn't mean you have to not work on the business anymore or you have to hire people that take over everything. Because for a lot of small businesses, that's not really practical. But be in a position where someone could come in and take over a manual or documentation and be able to do that. So we've used Confluence, like I mentioned. We've also used documents for clients that they can follow. So particularly in SaaS, we found that if you can build tutorial videos and various help desk documentation, then that can make answering support questions much easier from a customer service perspective. It might take a lot of time to document up front, but over time, those hours are going to really add up in the time you save, and also the better experience customers will have. So step 2 is make the business sustainable. The way I look at this when I firstly look to acquire businesses, and buyers look when they're looking to acquire, is they'll ask themselves, is that business still going to be thriving in 10 years? And there are a lot of things that people often do very early on in their business that are very short-term decisions and aren't necessarily something that's going to benefit the business in the long run. So I think it's really important as you're building a business, when you first start, often you've just got to do things just to get it off the ground. You need a little bit of hustle. You've got to promote it, get people buying. But as you build up and grow, figure out what you can do to make that business going to consistently perform and do well. So that might start with the business model you go after and the niche initially. So like I said in an earlier slide, focus on something that's evergreen. Another thing you can do is remove single points of failure, and that can really apply in lots of different areas. So for example, the SaaS business we own, when we took over the company, it just targeted Magento store owners. So Magento is an e-commerce platform. Since taking it over, we've made it platform agnostic, so it can now work on any e-commerce platform, meaning that if for whatever reason the product stops working on Magento, or the Magento market stops to like the product, or Magento launched a competitor, we're still protected against that. So these are things that I think very early on in a business, it's very difficult to diversify. It's all very well saying have 10 different sales sources, 10 different features, 10 different integrations. But as you grow, and once you kind of get that initial traction, they're really things you should start to focus on. And we've done it time and time again. And there are other single points of failure, and those other single points could be the people. So back to the documentation slide, the more you write out, you might have someone really reliable who's worked for you for a long time, but you never really know what's going to happen. They might leave, they might have other things that go on. Same with business partners. A lot of people don't really think that their business partner's ever going to leave or want to move on, but these are very real things that can happen. And the same with you as an individual. You might be happy running a business. Like I said, you might not be thinking about leaving a business at all. But the truth is, everyone really will leave their business at some stage. So removing those single points of failure is really important, particularly once you start to hit some traction, and there are other ways you can start to diversify away. So this is just a general point that I think a lot of people don't do, particularly in really small businesses, and that's being really consistent versus making decisions that are one time. So I think Jane mentioned earlier things like Product Hunt or Hacker News. They can be really great to get an initial boost of traffic, sales, building a mailing list, or whatever that might be, but they're not necessarily sustainable strategies that you can consistently do time and time again. they're quite unpredictable. So they might work well once, but you never really know when it's going to work again. And one of the other things, like we quite often get mentions on Hacker News and we'll have a massive spike of leads, but I found over the years that it's almost impossible to A, predict when that will happen, and B, actually control that yourself. I can't go onto Hacker News and post, like, I'm amazing, come work with us. It just doesn't work. You need people who've had a generally good experience to go write about you, and that's really what will drive business. But that's impossible to predict. So we focus everything we've bought and acquired and run and built on things that we can do consistently and are very predictable. So for a lot of small businesses, that's just really simple things like content marketing. Write a weekly blog post, send it out to your mailing list. You may well start at the very beginning with 10 people on your list, and it might seem really stupid putting in the effort to write them. I think someone mentioned earlier, write a message to 10 people. But ultimately, most people don't realize how many other people are on the list. They've signed up for a reason. They don't care if there's 500,000 people reading it or 2 people reading it. Consistently do that. Another one is social media. I think a lot of people, particularly early on, get really lazy and they just don't really bother posting. They might post once, twice a week. But it's really not that difficult to keep your social profiles active, even if you're just sharing really interesting posts that other people in your industry are doing. It doesn't necessarily need to be your own unique content all the time. And we found, back to the kind of getting other people talking about you, if you share other people's content regularly, that's a good way of kind of keeping influencers knowing who you are, aware who you are, and way more willing to share your stuff when it actually comes down to it. So those consistent things that might seem boring, particularly everyone in the room is an entrepreneur, it's really easy to jump between things. Everyone has new great ideas. But once you find something that works, do that time and time again. Might seem really boring, and over time, it's going to really pay dividends. In my case, what we've done, particularly as the team's grown, like I said, 23 people now. I definitely can't do everything myself. It's a case of figuring out a process for yourself and then getting people internally or contractors or services to take that over. So step 3, this is very relevant with SaaS businesses, but a lot of you in the room might not necessarily own a SaaS business, but there are still things here you can learn and apply. So step 3 is developing a recurring revenue model. So with SaaS companies specifically, buyers always prefer monthly plans, monthly income versus annual income. The trade-off there, and I found with a lot of small SaaS companies, they like to sell annual plans, particularly when they're starting out, because it's good for cash flow. But from a buyer perspective, if someone takes over that business, they might not be seeing income for 6-12 months from that same client. So if you can, focus on monthly revenue. And that really comes down to my second point, which is consistent cash flow. Monthly plans are quite predictable. Income will continue to come in. And if you're running your business well, you should continue to grow in that direction. Whereas focusing on annual income can be a lot less predictable. So from a cash flow perspective, particularly as your business grows, when you're just starting out and it's just one person, cash flow is less of a concern. But as you start to grow, hire people, investing in paid advertising, or whatever that might be, it really does become quite a key consideration. And the other thing that I think is really key, regardless of what your business is focus less on new customers. So many people, I go to a lot of conferences, and so much of the content is about how to acquire new customers, how to find new people, new marketing strategies. But there's so many people who just don't really think about the customers they already have. So if you have a service business, if you have a SaaS business, if you have an e-commerce business, whatever you might have, even someone on your mailing list, focus on those people. If they've bought from you once, it's much easier to get them to buy again than it is finding someone new and persuading them to work with you. Even if you have a relatively one-time service like we do with the brokerage company, there are always other things you can do. With a SaaS business specifically, the company we acquired, so we've owned it about 6 months now, and I've literally not touched anything to do with acquiring new customers. We've spent all of our time and resource working with the customers we already have, helping them do better with the product, so that helps reduce churn, increases their revenue to us, and means they're way more likely to talk about us. And while you can't necessarily predict when people are going to go post about how good your product or your service is, the more you keep in contact with people, the more you help them, the more likely they are to go away and talk about you. So that's, I think, a really key point that so many people forget, always chasing to acquire new customers, and they kind of forget about those that they already have. So step 4, again, all the way back to the initial slide, you might not be thinking at all about selling. But one of the things I've learned over the years, and every time I've acquired a business or started a business, I've always thought about it like a business. And that means making business-related decisions rather than personal, emotional decisions. So selling while you're growing is really important. I think a lot of people I see will hold on to companies while they're growing, and they'll leave it all the way to the stage where it starts to flatten out or eventually decline. So removing that emotion out and figuring out when is the best time for the business to sell is really important. Not when you personally have got bored of it, moved on to something else. Look at it as a business decision and figuring out if it's still growing. Like I mentioned early on, buyers are looking for businesses with opportunities to still grow. So don't get to the stage when it's run out. Sell out at the right time. And that might be much earlier than you've thought about selling. It might not even be on your radar at all. But it's really something that you should think about if you get to that stage. And the other thing is exit before you get stagnant. And stagnation can apply to lots of different parts of the business. It might be new client acquisition. You're really struggling to find new people to sign up. It might be the customers you already have. You've already sold them as much as you can. You can't launch new products, services, or in a SaaS company, it might be a new price plan. You might have maxed that out. You might have got stagnant yourself. You might be enjoying your lifestyle. You might still have a day job. You might have other projects you're working on. And a lot of people really leave it too late. And the same with lots of other things. It could be your relationship with your business partner or business partners. You might get to the stage where your visions really aren't aligned anymore, and it's difficult to take the business to the next level because you're both going in different directions. So that's a good time to think about, is that a good time to sell the business? Rather than what a lot of people do is they just kind of argue, leave the business running, and don't really grow as much as they should do. So yeah, like I said, stagnation can really apply in lots of areas. So a company we sold recently that we ran, we figured out when we took over the business, we spent a lot of time on monetization and making more with the clients we already had. We didn't focus a huge amount on new client acquisition because we thought that the previous owner had done a really good job of that, and the amount of work it would have been to improve that side of things would have been quite significant and maybe not a sensible use of resources. So we got to the stage where we'd pretty much done everything we could with the existing traffic, the existing list. We'd pretty much quadrupled the income. And there were various other things we had done that meant that when we actually sold the company, we made about 10 times more than we bought the business for just in 12 months. But it would have been really easy to just hold on to that business and think, well, we've 10x'd it already. What can we keep working on to keep growing it? But we realized that to get to that next level, it was going to be a whole new level of resource and focus. And from a business perspective, it just didn't make sense to do that. It wasn't the direction we were going in. We were working on other things. So that's a really good time to sell. Even though on paper, we'd done a fantastic job growing it. So that's where removing the emotions and looking at it as a business is really important. So I think that the phrase that sums all that up is, if you wait, it could be too late. Don't leave it until you've already got bored. Don't leave it until it's stagnant. Don't wait for it to decline. There's no reason why you can't take cash off the table if you've done a good job growing it and leave while it's kind of in a good position. So here are some things over the years. We've bought and sold lots of companies, and I've seen clients do it time and time again. Here are 6 things that we've done like very consistently. So firstly is building out a team. Like when I started FE International in 2010, I'd never hired anyone, never managed anyone, didn't think I'd ever like bring anyone to the team. And then hired my first person. And then over the years, we've consistently added to, like I say, 23 people today. And as the team grows, you find that you can hire people who are much better at you than pretty much everything. So I say everybody I hire in the area they work on, they will know or be better at that job than I would specifically. As a founder, particularly in a small business, you often have to wear lots of hats. You'll be doing literally everything in the business if there's 1 or 2 of you to start, but over time start to replace those things. So building a team is important. Even if you are running something really small, you may well find that replacing some of the tasks that you're spending time on, you can actually focus your resource on working on the business. And it may seem expensive to hire people early on, but you can often replace things you're doing, and your time is much more productively spent on other things. So existing customers, like I mentioned earlier, most of the businesses we've acquired and then successfully sold, we focused on the customers that are already there. You find that so many people spend all of their time on new customers, they don't focus on the ones they already have. If you focus on people you already have, regardless of what your business is, you make more money out of them and they will talk about you more. And we found that in almost every business, word of mouth is probably the best source of new clients, new traffic. It could even be like new links or people social sharing things you're posting. So focusing on those new customers can really focus on those existing customers can really pay dividends in the long run. Even if it might be more fun to run a new marketing campaign or test something new, there's often a lot of value left on the table. Consistency is really important. As an entrepreneur myself, it's really easy to jump between things. I have hundreds of ideas a day, and I always want to try new things. But being consistent, even if that's not necessarily you yourself, as an entrepreneur, you need to be that person coming up with new ideas all the time. But as you hire out a team and build processes, people who are employees tend to be much better at following things on a consistent basis. They like systems and processes, and that's how they really thrive. So be consistent, and if you can't be consistent as an individual or as an entrepreneur, find people who can. So that goes back to the team and get them doing the same thing. And the other thing with consistency is when you find things that work, keep doing them over and over again. So many people find something that works and they move on to something new, because they've kind of lost interest in what they were doing, and they might find that whatever they're working on is more fun. But I found if you can consistently do the same thing over and over and over again, then over time that compounds. It might not necessarily pay off in the short term. So if you're looking at your business over a 1-3 month period, maybe you're not going to see a huge difference. But if you're trying to build a business that's still thriving in 10 years, like I mentioned, those things now will really pay off over the long run. So particularly when it comes to buying companies, but also if you are running a company for yourself, removing the owner is a absolutely critical part of that. If you're when you leave your business, whatever happens, you're no longer going to be there, so someone has to take that over. So that does not mean you have to remove yourself now, particularly if you have a small business. You don't just stop working on the business, but make sure you're in a position where someone else could come in and take it over. And that's things I've done in a SaaS company when we took the business over, the founder was working full-time. He was convinced all the things he was doing were impossible to outsource. He was the best at customer service. He was the best developer. He was the best marketer. He was the only one that knew the industry. The clients all knew him. Basically everything, he was convinced he was the best person at doing it. So we took the business over. At the time, he had a part-time customer support rep who he didn't allow to work more than 2 hours a day for basically no reason other than the fact he thought he could do everything better. And we said to her, hey, do you want to work full-time now? It'd be great if we could turn around tickets quickly, get back to customers quickly, get customers talking to you. Since removing him, we've seen basically no change in customer satisfaction. Support requests get answered much quicker, and it's much more consistent. So I mentioned this before, but previously, you find with entrepreneurs, and the one we dealt with specifically, would kind of change his approach with customers each day. You'd have someone who'd ask for a discount, he'd give them a discount. Someone else would ask for a refund, give them a refund. Someone else would ask for a refund for the same thing, and he wouldn't give them a refund. And it was just a real mess of no process in place. Whereas with the employee we now have, she follows the processes we have in place. She still uses her initiative when it comes to it, and some things might need to be escalated. So as an owner, even if you've removed yourself, you'd still expect things to come to you. If it's like an issue with a big client or there's someone new coming in or other problems, you're still going to hear about those things. But you can really empower people with systems and processes. And then from a development perspective, I mentioned this in an earlier slide again, he had not documented any of the code. There was basically nothing written down. So we brought in an agency to come in, and they've basically spent the last 3 months going through the code, rewriting parts, documenting it really well. Whereas at the time, if you would have asked him 6 months ago, he would have said, that's impossible. I'm the only one that knows this platform, this product. No one can take it over. And that's really like value you can add to your own business. Do it now, and then when you do come down the line to sell, you're going to be really glad you did, because you're going to spend either a ton of time doing it after years of work, or you're going to have to hire someone else to come in and do it. And it's much easier to do it yourself early on. So I've mentioned this lots of times throughout, but putting systems in place and processes is really important, particularly once you find things that work. So when you are just starting out, there'll be lots of different things you try. You don't necessarily know what's going to work best. But when you do find those things, write them down, do them time and time again, turn them into process documents. So we have systems for basically everything in all of our companies. So, for example, on the SaaS business, if someone requests a refund, there's a system to follow as to how that can be done. If a client requests a discount, or a client wants a particularly good deal, or they want certain help, or whatever that might be, there are systems and processes to follow, and they're followed time and time again, meaning that we don't have different customers with different deals, which a lot of people do when they're starting out. It's really easy just to say, oh yeah, you can have a discount, you can have this extra service, oh, we'll do this differently for you. But as you scale, that becomes really challenging. So be disciplined and be consistent and build those systems that can be done time and time again. And again, with the SaaS company, this won't necessarily apply to every business, but the principles really do. We made it platform agnostic, so we removed the reliance on Magento and made it work for lots of different platforms. So you may well find if you have a plugin that's integrated with Stripe, there may well be lots of other payment processes you can integrate. When it comes to marketing, platforms you might use, a lot of people might just focus on Facebook ads, but try lots of different things. So also try Instagram, also try Twitter, try all these different things so you're not reliant on that one platform. So you don't necessarily need to look at platform in terms of the actual tech itself. You could look at it in terms of like different sources, reliance on different areas, reliance on individuals. But we found these six main things. We've done it with our SaaS company, we've done it with our brokerage company, done it with lots of other things I've worked on, and these things can be applied time and time again. So I always put this slide in. The most common question I get asked by basically everywhere I speak is, what is my business worth? I go through the presentation, yep, tell me this. So we've built over the years, selling our own companies and selling companies for other people, we track tons of data. We have tens of thousands of data points. So we've built a valuation model that's entirely proprietary. We're going through the patent process at the moment to kind of demonstrate the fact that it's like a very unique process. We've brought in data from over 400 deals, which has about 20,000 data points. So firstly, some client data and our data. And that means that all the decisions we can make, firstly, with regards to valuation, but also the things I'm speaking today aren't just one-off coincidences. You see a lot of people who talk and they might have just had one success, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is going to be applicable to you. So hopefully some of the things I've been speaking about, while they're based on my own personal experience, those are things that should be applicable to every business, particularly if you like think outside the box and think exactly what that point is. Every business you sell is based on a multiple of seller discretionary earnings. So that is effectively the net profit of the business, adding back anything you've paid yourself. So if you have a business that makes $500,000 a year in net profit, but you're paying yourself $200,000, then we would adjust that to $700,000. And the reason we do that is founders all pay themselves different amounts of money. If you've completely removed yourself from the business, you might not be paying yourself at all, or you might be working 20 hours a week on the business, 40 hours a week on the business. Some people need to pay themselves $200,000. Some people are happy taking $15,000. So it's a good way to standardize it. I've spoken a bit about SaaS companies today, but we really focus on SaaS businesses, content-based businesses, and e-commerce. So the multiples we tend to see, SaaS in the 3 to 6 times annual SDE range, content businesses 2 to 4, and e-commerce businesses 2 to 4, as a general rule of thumb. So I've spoken about a lot of things, but if you're only going to remember a few things, I've got some key takeaways. So the first is same, but different. Like the things I'm talking about might not necessarily apply to your business specifically, but the general principles can be. And these are just some example businesses we've sold, both of ourselves and for clients. And if you could do this with all 450 businesses we've sold, every business is different. There's no point me saying, I've done this, go do that exact thing with your business and it's going to work, because it's just not true. You can't do the same thing with every business and expect the same result. What might work really well for me might not work at all for you. What might not have worked for me might work really well for you as well. But while every business is different, there are always some similarities. So the points I've been focusing on today are things that I've seen time and time again work. They're not just one-offs. It's not just based on my experience. It's lots of other things that people do consistently based on real data and real experience. So the 6 main things to think about when you go away, even if you don't remember anything else, is make yourself dispensable. I think for me, this is probably the hardest thing as an entrepreneur, because much like the person we bought the SaaS company from, I was convinced I was the only person that could do everything. I was like, I'm good at this, good at this, good at this. I can do absolutely everything. But over the years, I've kind of learned to remove the ego from things and hire people who are much better at what I do. And quite frankly, without them, we wouldn't have scaled to where we are today. So you can still work on your business. Making yourself dispensable doesn't mean you don't have to go to work on a Monday morning and you've stopped working 12-hour days, because as entrepreneurs, that's going to happen. entrepreneurs like working, they'll consistently do that. But be in a position where, if needed, you are dispensable. The business is not reliant on you. You're not necessarily the one answering every customer support ticket. You don't write every line of code. You're not the only one doing all of the work every day. And that's really something that does take some time, like both from a resource perspective. If you've got a small business making $1,000 a month, it would obviously be stupid of me to suggest hire someone for 5,000, because that's just not very realistic. But as you grow, just think about these things. And it could just be as simple as writing down the things you're doing, even if it's just you by yourself. And that moves on to the second point, which is document everything as you go, particularly when it works, but also write down the things that don't work. If you're one of those people that has lots of different ideas and you test lots of different things, if something doesn't work, write it down so you know you don't have to do it again, or you know that when you do come back to that specific thing, you know what hasn't worked before and how you can improve it. Outsource as much as I can. So something I did, definitely takes a while to get used to, but once you start outsourcing things, you realize there are people out there who are going to be better at basically everything than you are. And it's not necessarily practical right away, but that doesn't mean when you're only small that you can't outsource things. You might find, like, really early on, you would rather spend your time on marketing rather than building the product. So start hiring people. Don't have to be full-time. Find contractors. There are lots of services out there that can do things cost effectively in lots of different areas. So where you can, outsource it. This, with a SaaS business, this is kind of automatically baked into your business model. But if you have a service company or whatever else it might be, look to create a recurring income and repeat business. So that might be, with a SaaS company, it's a monthly subscription or an annual subscription. With a service company, you might have people on retainer. They might be paying you the same amount every single month. If you have a mailing list and you think, well, I only have a one-time product, actually, if you have a mailing list, that's really not true, because you can continuously sell to them or keep in contact with those people, meaning they will either reorder, buy any new products or services you launch, or tell other people about you, which might not necessarily be them buying again, but it's still a form of repeat business because they're going to keep talking about you. Sell while you're still growing. I think this is, of all of the lessons, this is probably the most counterintuitive. I think it's obvious that you should kind of make yourself dispensable in your business. It's every entrepreneur's dream to not have to do any work and just have everything run for them. But selling while it's growing, a lot of people say, well, why would I bother doing that? I might as well just wait until I've got as much as I can out of it. But from a valuation perspective and a buyer perspective, people want to buy businesses that are doing well. They want to buy into growth stories. They don't want to buy something that you've already got bored of, has already started to decline. So that's where it's really worth taking the emotion out of things and looking at it as a business decision rather than like a very emotional decision. And know what it's worth. So back to the very first slide again, you might not be thinking about selling now. It might not even be something you ever want to do. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to run my business forever. But the truth is, you are going to have to leave your business at some stage. So figure out what it's worth. You can always get a valuation for your company. There's never any obligation to go through with that process. Talk to different people, and then figure it out from there. So that's everything I've got for now. If you want to learn a little bit more, I've got a short e-course up at finternational.com/femto, which will go into a little bit more of this in more detail. Thank you. So you got time for questions? Hello?
So thank you for the presentation. I really love it how you have the practical tips that work for you even though you wouldn't be selling. But I'm interested in data. So you see about the testing. So what's the value of automated testing and which kind of test coverages you see in the products that you're selling?
So testing, specifically?
Does it have like any value to the buyer and
So my caveat before I answer your question is I'm not a developer, so trying to write a line of code myself would be a disaster, and no one would buy any of my products. But when it comes to testing, like, it's something that we've built in over time, and as you scale, it definitely becomes important, because you often find if you have to do things manually time and time again, then that's just like basically people's time wasted. So if you can build like automated tests or whatever that might be in, so in like practical terms, on FE International, just some like very simple things, is we've had issues before where people say your contact form isn't working. So we've now built in automated tests that make sure that is working. And it's one of those like single points of failure that you don't really think about. It's one of many things, but you can build in those automated tests. I'd say from a buyer perspective, most won't really think about it, because it's one of those issues that usually when you're testing things, they won't come up that regularly, and often you'll be documenting ways to fix those things when they come up. But it's definitely the kind of thing you can do to improve efficiency. So if you can do it, then...
Okay, but it's not one of the 200 data points that you actually collect now?
No. So we collect the data points, we collect data on absolutely everything. Yeah, absolutely everything. But I'd say there's not something that comes up often enough with either buyers or sellers or businesses we've looked at and ran.
Thank you very much. That was the information.
Okay. Hello?
So you mentioned focusing on existing customers.
Yes.
Seems to be a great strategy. So what methods do you observe as consistently effective of getting them more engaged in buying more, upselling, etc., etc.? What exactly did you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like the first thing, a lot of people, so again, slightly counterintuitive, we talk about removing yourself from the business. And a lot of people think that that means like don't bother talking to your clients. Like from a practical perspective, the simplest thing we found is email people if they're regular customers and just offer them a phone call, sign up to something like Calendly, send them a link for a 15-minute call and just talk to them. And it might seem like really obvious, but we found if you just talk to people, then firstly they'll tell you what they like about your product or service, what they don't like, how you can improve it. If it's a SaaS company, you might figure out that they're going to churn. They might say, actually, your product's too expensive, or I'm leaving because of this feature. In a service company, again, just speaking to people, you can get all sorts of feedback. One of the reasons I like coming to conferences is people who have worked with us before or might be on our mailing list will always give me feedback. So someone earlier came up to me and said, hey, Thomas, I've been looking at a business you're selling. Have you thought about adding this in? And that's something that straight away can go in and improve our processes. So the first one is talk to people. I like speaking to people on the phone. Depending on the nature of your product, if you're selling something for $10 a month, then maybe you don't want to phone every single person. In that case, it might be a case of emailing. Another thing we did, like I mentioned with social, is share that, depending on your business at least, follow them and share the kind of stuff they're working on. And we found that's a good way to like keep in contact with people. And I think the thing with this like strategy specifically is you often don't have to ask people to actually buy anything new. They'll kind of do it naturally. They'll use more of your product, more of your service. If people hear about you enough and hear from you enough and they like you, they're going to buy what you have. They're going to say, well, what else are you working on? And if they mention, oh, I've really been looking for this feature, you can say, well, actually, I was planning on doing that in the next 3 months. Let's keep in contact. And the thing beyond that is keeping notes on people. It's really easy. Like, I speak to thousands of people a year, and I have quite a bad memory from time to time. So if I never wrote anything down, then I would not really remember anything. So when you speak to people, write notes. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do everything for everyone. So you shouldn't call people and then every feature request you get, write it down and then do it. Maybe when you're starting out, that makes sense. But as you grow, you have to be like quite disciplined. But yeah, I genuinely think it's as simple as calling people, because the vast majority of business owners don't bother calling their clients. Or even if you're not comfortable on the phone or they're relatively low value, then just email them. And then I guess at a more automated level, you could build in like automated drip sequences. But I really like the old school way of just calling people. or meeting them if you can. Like go to conferences, find events where they're at, and just ask them. And I always find speaking to people on the phone or in person, you get much more honest feedback, whether that's like good or bad.
That's surprising. I was expecting some, marketing automation advice or something like that, but it's more like collecting information.
Yeah, I generally just think it's as simple as like talking to people. I mean, there are obviously ways you can automate these things. Like, for example, Calendly. If you're busy, which I'm sure you are, using Calendly just makes life much easier. But just talking to people, it's not particularly scalable. So on paper, it might seem pointless. But unless you have a huge business with thousands of clients, you should be able to make 15 minutes or 20 minutes for a call. And if your clients like you, and most people with small businesses, their clients like them, they're always going to be happy to talk to you. But no, I don't have any like clever tricks. Talk to people, phone them. Craig.
2 questions. You talked about churn.
Yes.
I assume that's revenue churn that you guys look at?
So we do measure both. I would say caveat would be, I think revenue churn is the more important metric to focus on.
Okay. What's like the over-under there what's good?
That is the $1 million. So one thing I mentioned, like low churn is important. I see with a lot of small SaaS companies, churn rates tend to be a lot higher than the ones you see. If you follow any like big SaaS blogs where they're like, oh, in enterprise SaaS, a bad churn rate is like 2%. I mean, in reality, if you are a single developer, it's highly unlikely to have a churn rate of 2%, even though VCs will say this is what you have to have. I'd say rule of thumb for revenue churn, anything above, say, 5% would be getting high. Customer churn, anything above 10% would be considered high. But it does depend on the nature of your product as well. And that's why focusing on the customers you already have is really important, because on the SaaS business we acquired, we currently have negative revenue churn. And that's just because we talk to the people we already have and say, how can we help you do better with our product? And they end up moving up the pricing tiers and paying us more. So that's where that practical advice comes in. You can really turn those metrics around. He previously wasn't talking to his customers. He was always like worrying about finding new ones. And I was like, well, why not call the ones we already have and help them do more? So yeah, as a rule of thumb, I'd say anything more than 5 on revenue churn, anything more than 10 on customer churn. Anything beyond that does get quite high. It also depends on the size of the business. I'd say like if you're making 100,000 a year or more, then that churn rate should really start to come down. When you're starting out, almost every product when it launches will have a 20% churn rate. It's kind of unavoidable, but you should be able to bring that down.
You talked about MRR being more valuable than ARR.
Yes.
Every SaaS company defaults to annual plans now.
Yeah.
Just kind of your thoughts on how you will see that in selling those businesses down the road, maybe.
Yeah, it's true. If you go to like the VC world, in the enterprise SaaS world, they all sell annual plans. I mean, from a practical perspective, part of the reason enterprise companies sell annual plans is so they can pay their salespeople. If you have a $1,000 a month product, or you can sell it for $10,000 up front, then the sales rep can make, say, 25%. And on 10,000, that's much more attractive. So I'd say that's the main reason that enterprise companies use annual plans. People also talk about it lowering churn rate, which may well be true, but the problem with that theory is your business has to be many years old to prove that. You have to have 3 to 5 years of data. It's all very well saying, my business is 11 months old, look, no one's ever churned, but that's because they haven't renewed yet. So you need that extra history. So I'd say in most small businesses, like below, say, $1 million a year, that monthly revenue from a buyer perspective is just more predictable. And also, when you're running a small SaaS, you're going to get much quicker data on where your problem areas are. Because you could have everyone sign up to an annual. You could be a great salesman, everyone signs up to your annual plan, and then 75% of those people churn in 12 months, but you don't know that until 12 months' time. Whereas on a monthly basis, if you have a churn rate of 20%, you know you have a onboarding problem or a feature problem or a marketing problem or whatever that might be. So that's why I like monthly plans from a kind of a small business owner perspective. And they're the practical reasons why I think you should probably avoid annual plans. Although I definitely get the temptation of the cash flow. Like, would you rather have $10,000 today or $12,000 over the course of a year? Most people will say 10,000. But there are those reasons why I would focus on monthly. I mean, I would say as a general caveat, the mix we tend to look for is about 80% of revenue coming from monthly plans and then 20% of revenue coming from annual plans. And I'd say the most traditional pricing for an annual plan would be 10 months of the monthly payment. It's probably the most common I see. The people where I see them making mistakes because they're chasing cash flow, they'll price it at like 3 months or 6 months. So it might be $100 a month product and they sell an annual subscription for $500, which is definitely not something I'd recommend.